I heard of the suffragist movement briefly through shows, books, and other media, but I really began to realize the extreme hardships and sacrifices made just to secure the vote for women after I watched the PBS professional broadcast of Suffs, a musical following young suffragist Alice Paul as she tries to push for more action-based movement in the National American Women's Suffrage Association, otherwise known as NASA. Paul, along with her good friend Lucy Burns, planned their first march as newly appointed chairs of NASA's Congressional Committee for March 3, 1913, through the streets of Washington, D.C. This march was deliberately timed the day before the presidential inauguration of President Woodrow Wilson, and followed the same path as the inaugural parade that would take place the next day. Leading the charge was activist, lawyer, and speaker Inez Milholland on a white horse wearing a white dress, cape, and a golden tiara. She was the face of hope, an epic reclamation of the traditional knight in shining armor. Behind her marched 5,000 to 10,000 women and over 20 floats demanding an amendment. The march was organized to walk in sections based on occupation and state, bringing attention to women's participation in the achievements in the public environment. Unfortunately, Paul's vision for the parade was quickly shot down by the crowd of over 250,000 spectators. They flooded the streets in front of and behind the group of protesters, and the women soon found themselves surrounded by hostile men who sexually harassed and yelled insults at them. The police were either unable or unwilling to contain the aggressive crowd, but for most of the women, it would not be enough to stop their stride. Determined, groups of marching women locked arms and pushed their way through the crowd, ignoring the profanities thrown at them by the hordes of angry men. They heroically held their ground until the U.S. Army arrived to clear the streets. 3 years after this groundbreaking protest, the National Women's Party was established in 1916 as a more militant wing of NASA, headed by Alice Paul, of course. It built a membership of dedicated supporters from across the country that rallied in support of women's suffrage and engaged in protests, marches, and organizing in an attempt to secure the vote. Another notable protest organized by the National Women's Party that was considered very radical at the time was the Silent Sentinels, a famous organized protest consisting of over 2,000 women, and the first organized protest located at the White House. Women took turns standing silently outside the White House 6 days a week from January 10, 1917 to June 4, 1919. They held signs and banners and stood strong through all sorts of weather. This protest was not only to further secure the amendment, but also to call out the hypocrisy of President Woodrow Wilson, who claimed to fight for democracy abroad in World War I, yet denied American citizens of their rights simply because they were female. This groundbreaking protest was deeply inspired by the devoted suffragist Inez Milholland, who collapsed on stage while speaking on women's suffrage in Los Angeles, her final recorded public words being, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" During the Silent Sentinels, women were harassed, ignored, and were arrested starting June 1917 in regards to obstructing traffic. At the Occoquan Workhouse in Lorton, Virginia, suffragists were dragged, beaten, and subjected to terrible conditions such as maggot-infested food and unsanitary cells. After a hunger strike led by suffragette Alice Paul, the women endured force feedings. Paul was often subject to solitary confinement and was threatened to be admitted into St. Elizabeth's Insane Asylum after she was placed in a psychiatric ward. Starting on November 17, 1917, Alice Paul and all other hunger-striking suffragists were released from prison from DC's district jail. They were even released by the same judge who sentenced them, Police Court Judge Alexander Maloney. Pressured by the constant and extreme measures of Alice Paul and her group of radical suffragists, President Wilson made a brief speech in the Senate chamber vying for women's suffrage on September 30th, 1918. Although they now had the president on their side, the battle was not over. In order for the amendment to be ratified into the Constitution, 3/4 of the states needed to agree on it. Finally, on May 21st, 1919, the House of Representatives officially ratified the amendment, and an almost 80-year fight finally came to an end, and the courageous women who fought for their right to vote emerged victorious.